where do you think SDV is today?
I think what was different about the SDV message at this year's CES than CES in the past was the refinement of what SDV means. I think it has matured into, well, what SDV really focuses on is what is the software architecture first,
Mhm.
and then what's the hardware necessary to implement that
Right.
architecture.
Hi, Phil. How are you today?
I'm well, Junko. How are you?
You look like you survived CES okay. And how was
You
it?
know, the important thing is always to get home,
Yeah.
and
There
I
you go.
accomplished that. So, it was it was everything I hoped out of CES.
So today I am with Phil Amsrud. He is the senior principal analyst at S&P Global. And you and I actually bumped into each other
We
at
did.
Nvidia, the Q&A session, I think.
Yeah, I
Well,
think I was the only one taking advantage of the free food. I
yeah,
think you had much more discipline than I did.
that was actually not bad food. I was impressed.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, so I am actually here to talk about among all those chips being announced at
Mhm.
CES in the automotive area, what big trends have you seen? What was the big takeaway at CES this year?
AI has been the big thing the last couple of years. I think what was particularly interesting is the AI evolution. A couple of years ago, it was, you know, just AI.
Yeah.
Then it became Gen AI was a thing that everybody was promoting. This year, really because I focused mostly on self-driving and ADAS, it
Right.
was physical AI.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting progression within the automotive space in general. When most of us use the term infotainment, we're talking about, the how many different clusters there are in the car, and how's the how does the how do the drivers and the passenger interact with the car to be comfortable. In that domain is really become the HMI interface between the driver and the car. So, whether it is more speech capabilities or things like that, it's
Yeah.
going to be more conversational. And
Mhm.
therefore, Gen AI fits that domain
That
nicely.
right.
But when you go over into ADAS,
Yeah.
you know, I don't need something that's conversational. I need
Yeah.
something that doesn't run into stuff.
Right.
And the physical AI domain there makes a lot more sense because, you know, even though I'm in my little virtual bubble as the
Hmm.
driver within my
Hmm.
car is in the real world, and it has to respond to things happening in the real world.
Right.
It's responding to other things in the real world. It's
Hmm.
also those surroundings. My car can have an influence on those surroundings. How do I make sure that these cars are safe under any and all driving circumstances?
Right. Well, if it is not ADAS, it is on you. I mean, human drivers would have to figure that out, right? I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
we tend to live in the real world.
yeah. But speaking of which, what I thought I'd like to get your take on this is
Mhm.
that I used to think that self-driving cars is really far away. Okay, Waymo can do whatever he wants to do, and they actually started expanding their operation in the different
Sure.
cities. Having attended the Nvidia or having heard Mobileye talk about it,
Hmm.
I was kind of shocked to see that whole robotaxi discussion came back into focus. Now people are talking about how can we scale robotaxi came in focus this year. What do you think?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I would augment that. And I
Okay.
would say that one of the things that I think the physical AI trajectory lends itself to is self-driving cars, which we're interested in.
Yeah.
But beyond that, robotics.
Ah.
And then I think you have this whole, if you buy my earlier premise that the infotainment domain is going to be more about communications and HMI, the autonomous or driving assistance domain
Hmm.
is really going to be more about safety and interoperability,
Yeah.
autonomy writ large, meaning it's not just autonomous vehicles, it's also robotaxis, but it's also humanoid robotics. So the that whole trajectory, it surprised me, but in reflection, it shouldn't have. That Mobileye said that they're bringing Mentee
Right.
into their portfolio, and
Right.
it's like, oh, I had always been kind of the opinion that, well, is there going to be a play at some point in Mobileye's future where they try to bring in an infotainment
Mm,
angle as we try to squeeze more and more domains into fewer and fewer SoCs.
right.
And now it seems to be, well, that's not really maybe the way it's going to play out. That we don't need to squeeze all these domains on vehicle into a single SoC, but
Ah.
we need the autonomy infrastructure,
Right.
ecosystem, if you will, to be
Right.
able to go from driving assist to self-driving to robotaxis to humanoid robotics, and then whatever's going to be beyond
I
that.
see. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. The Professor Shashua actually, talked about that how, Mentee or the acquisition or robotics is going to be important for additional revenue stream coming
Right.
into Mobileye, right?
Yeah, yeah, and having a hallway conversation with Mobileye, it was like, you can say that there's going to be increased penetration rate of self-driving or assisted driving features added to cars, but the number of cars will probably be relatively fixed for the foreseeable future.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
all of a sudden going to start building 120 million cars a year.
Right.
We're still going to be plus minus 100 million. But you
Right.
look at robotics and say, how many robotic applications are there?
Yeah.
Don't know, but it could be huge. And
Yeah.
say, oh, okay, so if you're Mobileye, you've made all this investment
Right.
that can help cars drive themselves, why wouldn't
Oh,
you want to use leverage that same investment for something that is very adjacent?
now, when it comes to chips that go inside these cars, and so as you mentioned, you and I talked about before that how do you put the infotainment and the ADAS chips together? That seems to be like that was on the horizon last year, but now we're suddenly going back to okay, how do we have this coherent roadmap from L2, L2 plus L3,
Yeah,
L4, L5. But it's like
right, right.
the same chip company, how can we build a roadmap that scales to if companies want, right? I mean, is in that domain, if that is the premise, it seems like both Mobileye and Nvidia have a sort of advantage over this, or how's Qualcomm fit into that picture then?
I think that Mobileye obviously made a big announcement with Mentee.
Yeah.
Nvidia, the message. I mean, Jensen's a captivating speaker.
Yes.
He always is very effective at delivering their vision.
Yeah.
But quite honestly, what he presented at this CES isn't radically different than what he was presenting, last year, if not at
Last year. Yeah.
CES, at GTC.
Yeah.
So I think it's more refinement than
Yeah.
it is a brand new message. In the case of Qualcomm, I think their approach to CES is more about these are the design wins, the
Mm.
relationships, the partnerships, those kind of things that they have developed.
Mhm.
And I know when we wrote them down, I think there were seven different um, announcements
Yeah.
that came out of Qualcomm, but their messaging is different at CES than say Nvidia and
Right.
Mobileye's is.
Yeah.
But even within that, when we had small breakout sessions with Qualcomm, I heard very similar things in terms of scalability. They've been talking about your Snapdragon Ride and Snapdragon
Right.
Cockpit, and then the Elite releases. You're going to have two different um, hardware implementations targeted for two different domains, even though they're related, two different
Right.
domains, but one's going to be that's going to be agentic. The other one perhaps is going to be physical AI based.
Right.
When you talk about scalability, you can still separate those domains into how do I scale in one versus how do I scale in the other. You no longer kind of are compelled to say, well, how do I scale both of them together? But I
Right.
think Qualcomm's message with Flex is that, if you need cockpit performance, have a Snapdragon Cockpit Elite. If you
Yeah.
need ADAS
Uh-huh.
performance, it's the Ride Elite. And if you need to combine them into one where performance is not the issue, but
Yeah.
cost is, then you can put
Uh,
that into a flex. And I did hear I heard it quietly. I didn't hear anybody beating a drum, but quietly everybody was saying, it's all about cost. It's not just scalability,
yeah.
it's how do we scale cost effectively?
Yeah.
And if you're a high compute supplier like
Mhm.
Nvidia, you see the solution to that differently. And I heard that not just, in terms of the big three, Mobileye, Qualcomm, and Nvidia, but also from the discussions I had with Renesas and TI, also with uh, MIPS Global Foundry, where
Okay. All right. Yeah.
they're all talking about, hey, I've got this core, either at this point, it physically exists or virtually exists. I've
Right.
got this core that's capable of this level of performance,
Okay.
but through chiplets, I can gang things together so that
Uh,
I can go from, tens of tops to hundreds of tops to thousands of tops,
I see.
with
It's
the same core. So,
yeah.
it's got a standard hardware platform. More importantly, it's got a standard software platform
Right.
that gives me that scalability so
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
I can come in with an L2 plus
Uh,
cost appropriate solution. I could come in scaling just the software
right.
or by scaling the hardware and the software to come up with a cost effective solution that goes up to L4.
I was thinking about the software-defined vehicle. That
Mhm.
was a big deal last year, and I think it's still a big deal. Where do you think SDV is today among regular car makers?
Yeah, I think what was different about the SDV message at this year's CES than CES in the past was the refinement of what SDV means. I think when we first saw SDV showing up on the CES stage, it was almost synonymous with OTA.
Right,
In that, hey, what a software-defined vehicle is a car that can change the software out on the road after you've purchased it without having to take it into the dealership.
right.
And now I think it has matured into, well, what SDV really focuses on is what is the software architecture first,
Mhm.
and then what's the hardware necessary to implement that
Right,
architecture. Now that I don't have to have a common AI implementation for all domains,
Ah,
my software architecture maybe looks different in different domains. So the SDV implementation for the cockpit or inside the car can be
yeah,
different for what it is outside the car.
yeah,
And as I better define what those software requirements are,
yeah.
then that's going to drive what my hardware implementation is, as opposed to, well, the hardware definition in the future is going to be, I'm at 5 nanometers today. What can I do if I go to 2 nanometers? I think that's the companies that really embrace SDV will see that as a secondary factor than a primary factor. I don't have to get to the most advanced process node unless the software requires that.
I see.
Instead of, hey, here's as much processing as is humanly possible, which means I've got to be at the most advanced process node. Now go forth and write code to make this thing do something.
Right, right, right. But companies like, for example, the I found that like NXP is doing something different. They're not talking about just big brain that does,
Right.
the super duper chip like Nvidia's. NXP is coming in, said, well, it's not all about big brains for the central compute, but there's also another big brain needed to talk to the sensors in different parts of
Mhm.
the right? Cars.
Yeah, and I do think this started a few years ago, and I
Yeah,
think it's continuing that there's those that, for lack of a better word, let's say are approaching it from an HPC standpoint versus those that are saying, you know what, I don't want to play in that space,
yeah,
so I'm going to play around that. That HPC is going to
right,
be on
exactly.
vehicle.
Yeah,
I can either go head to head and try to displace them, or
yeah,
I can
or
look at what are all the sockets that go around it. And what I
yeah,
thought was interesting, it's not like they weren't present in previous years, but I thought
mhm,
what was interesting in talking to, say, TI and Renaissance this year
mhm.
is they both were very clear about, we want to be in that HPC space. We want to have hundreds, thousands of tops worth of performance, but what we bring uniquely to the market is we have an automotive background. We have been doing this
Ah,
automotive stuff for decades,
right.
which, if they can put that story together, it will be interesting to see how the OEMs react. I worry a little the OEMs may have already crossed that Rubicon of
Yeah,
saying, you know what, I'm used to working with these other guys, so and until I've got evidence to the contrary, I think they're good.
yeah, yeah,
But I thought it was interesting. You brought up NXP.
yeah,
NXP has stayed away from an HPC space.
yeah,
I thought TI, when they introduced the TDA4, I think that's 32 tops.
yeah,
Um, that was a good first step into it.
yeah,
But with their TDA5, now they're talking about being able to get up in the space where they want to compete against
yeah.
the
Interesting.
Mobileye's, the Nvidias,
Yeah,
the Qualcomms.
yeah. No, that's actually fascinating. So, whatever happened to the OEMs who actually developed their own SoCs? That of Tesla or Rivian, right? Where
Yeah,
do they stand?
that's a better question than I have answer. Because Rivian, they have a relationship with Volkswagen
Yeah,
for the cockpit, which Qualcomm says they're a player there.
yeah,
Um, Mobileye plays in the ADAS space with Volkswagen.
yeah,
So I don't know what another SoC in under that umbrella would
yeah,
look like. I mean, Tesla's a different animal.
yeah, it
Um,
is. Right, right.
but I when I think of like the Neos of the world who went off to do their own SoC, um, one, I don't think it's a trivial undertaking.
Right.
Um, and if the SDV methodology that we talked about a few minutes ago,
Mhm.
if you really believe that,
Mhm.
then it's going to be perhaps less and less about how do you differentiate yourself with your hardware
Yeah.
and more about how do you differentiate yourself with your software. Now,
Software.
if you're an OEM and you're creating SoCs
Mhm.
that enable your software to do things that nobody else can do, then you have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
But if you're just producing, another HPC
Yeah.
that's got a lot of tops, but
Yeah.
really doesn't differentiate you or doesn't give you a commercial advantage over
Yeah.
buying it from somebody else, boy, if I was an OEM, I would really question if I want to go undertake that
Yeah. No,
that
that
big a task.
yeah, no, that's very true. So, and then from the chips company standpoint, we mentioned the Mobileye's foray into the robotics and
Hmm.
Nvidia certainly, even Qualcomm was really big on robotics, right? So it's like chip companies also find that they really need a new revenue stream beyond the automotive. I think that was a theme this year.
Well, I don't know if I would say that they felt that the revenue stream in automotive was insufficient.
Yeah,
I think it's a if you do this stuff long enough, it always takes longer for the automotive stuff to materialize than originally expected. So
ah,
you spend a lot of money to put things in place, but
yeah,
if it takes longer for that money to get
do
paid back,
right,
you've got to find another way to justify the investment.
yeah,
So I think there's that side of it, but
yeah.
I think there's more of just the acknowledgement or recognition of the synergy between all autonomous applications and
Right.
the ones that are going to exist in the real world.
Hmm.
If you're starting out by saying, I'm going to develop a humanoid robotic and I want to start at ground zero and build it up, uh, okay, but that seems like you're taking a long way around if somebody could say, and here's something that we've been working on for decades in automotive that at least gets you a
Right.
head start. It would give you the sensor interfaces.
Yeah.
You'll add some other sensors to it, but it would
Yeah.
at least give you a starting
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
that looks like a win-win for everybody.
All right. Very good. Well, thanks. No, this, it's more complicated actually in a way because they'd like to see synergy
Yeah.
between autonomous vehicles and autonomous, robots, I guess. So we're not talking about, your grandfather's robots. We at the manufacturing line, and we're talking about the humanoid itself or the robotic itself is going to move doing multi tasks.
Somebody asked me a question during one of the hallway conversations. Would you prefer to have one humanoid robot that did everything,
Yeah,
or a series of task specific robots that each did their own thing, but now you've got perhaps dozens of these
yeah,
in your life? And I don't know what the right answer is,
yeah,
but I also kind of feel like we've crossed that bridge
yeah,
now. There's kind of no going back, and
yeah,
as such, if you have a technology that you've been working on for autonomy, you got to find as many places to put it as you can. And I think these barriers, oh, this is automotive versus this is industrial versus, those
right,
things start becoming very porous.
yeah,
As you start talking about, software to find anything,
yeah.
because I can reuse that software and then I tailor it. There was I forget the gentleman's name. I think the name of the company was Skilled AI.
Oh, yes, I've
Um,
heard of them. Yeah, skilled
yeah,
AI. Yeah,
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 and
yeah,
and he had made the comment during a panel discussion about generalize first, then specialize, and it feels like we're kind of at the cusp of that autonomy is really kind of the generalization. Figure out how to do autonomy,
Right.
and then you specialize it for the automotive implementation, the
Right. The field.
residential implementation, et cetera.
Right.
Although in his specific example, he was saying for an OEM, they would generalize that, so the SDV model, and then specialize it for each implementation of it,
Vision.
because the sensor locations are going to be different on every vehicle. So you're going to have to go in and
Ah,
tweak it. But
interesting.
you're not starting over. You're just
Yes.
refining it.
So the upshot is that we continue to have same players actually in the automotive semiconductor market, which
Yes.
is a
Yeah,
good thing. But also everybody is looking for expanding their territory, and the trend is definitely the towards the autonomy.
I think what's important in that discussion,
Yeah,
Junko, is if you're an OEM and
yeah,
somebody brings you an L2
yeah.
solution and says it's a point solution, it will go no further than L2 Are you interested? I think most OEMs are going to say, boy, point solutions, we've done that. What we really need is
Is
something that scales. And I think ultimately, this is all about scale. So,
right.
we've how is automotive going to be more successful with autonomous vehicles is as more and more of that technology can scale from, L2 plus up to L4, but
Yeah,
also how can that same platform kind of scale within automotive and outside of automotive?
yeah. Oh, that's a very good point. That's a good summary. All right. Well, thank you very much for
Always
spending
a
time with
pleasure.
me. Yeah, yeah. We'll get together again soon, okay? Yeah,
Sounds good. We don't always have to go to Vegas to do it.
exactly. Thank you.
All right, Django,
Talk to
take
you
care.
later. Bye.
Bye now.